winning at all costs. Decimation today is a maligned term. Often it is used to describe an annihilation or even entire loss in some disaster. However, the word deci as being of 10, whilst being rarely used, it spanned at least 8 centuries as the Roman army's last resort in collectively enforcing its imperium militum, a Roman commander's almost absolute right of rule over his soldiers. Decimation was applied to Roman soldiers as a unit, such as a legion or cohort, either for rebellion, cowardice, or poor performance in combat. Troops across a legion, regardless of rank, would be split into groups of 10. The 10 would draw lots. Whomever pulled the black ball or short straw would be beaten to death by the other 9. The punishment didn't stop after the summary executions. The other 9 soldiers would be put on a strict ration of barley and banished from the protection of the camp walls until the commander had deemed it time to return to the fold. Decimations of the Republic. The earliest decimation, which was recorded by Titus Livius, is the 471 BC incident in Italy, where the army of Consul Oppius Claudius Sabinus in Regilensis fled from battle with the Valsa. Claudius's reaction was to kill every 10th soldier in his entire army. In 72 BC, Marcus Licinius Crassus notably employed this form of punishment in the Third Servile War, when an errant legate, Mummius, against Crassus, express orders led to legions prematurely into a fight with the rebels of Spartacus. The legions consequently suffered heavy losses against the rebel army that had just defeated the 2 current co-consuls, Gellius Publicola and Cornelius Lentulus Cladanius, killing 3,000 troops. Crassus was furious that Mummius had added needlessly to the mounting butcher's bill. For the 2 defeated legions, the losses didn't stop there. 50 more men were selected by lots to be beaten to death by their own comrades.
I expected better from my best soldiers.
Decimations of the emperors. Around 3 decades passed until the next instances. These were under Julius Caesar in 49 BC in Placentia and Mark Antony in 44 BC in Brundisium. However, both were applied only to smaller groups, in the former killing a 10th of the 120 ringleaders of a mutiny in Caesar's beloved 10th Legion. In the latter, Cicero describes only a targeted killing of supposedly disloyal centurions. Mark Antony wielded this brutal form of discipline again in 36 BC in Parthia, although this was to a limited group within 2 cohorts who had fled when the Parthians set his siege line on fire. Some 80 men in all, 40 per cohort. Another decimation followed in 34 BC, documented by Cassius Dio under Octavian for a cohort which fled from the Illyrian tribes during his campaign in Illyricum. As the cohorts were commonly depleted in this theater, it would suggest anywhere between 30 and 48 men executed from what historians reckon to be from either Legio 7 or X. After this incident, over 50 years elapsed before the next decimation under the governor of Africa, Lucius Apronius, in a D20 for a cohort's woeful defeat and abandonment in Numidia against Tacfarinas, a former Roman auxiliary who had rallied the Numidian tribes to rebel. This is one of the most well-documented and ruthlessly executed public decimations. According to Tacitus, a cohort's soldiers were killed by cudgels and officers put to the sword for all the army and the Numidians to witness. Yet another 50 years elapsed until the notoriously unpopular Galbus botched decimation of the Legio Iudaeatrix, during the year of the 4 emperors in 68 AD. This was a contingent of soldiers who refused to be demoted to naval service. Only a few were actually killed, as the entire decimation did not take place, as no one took it upon themselves to see it through. When decimation becomes annihilation. The most notable instance must be that recorded by Eucherius of Lyon around 443 AD of the entire Christian Theban legion. The legion was garrisoned at Thebes in Egypt in the latter half of the 3rd century AD and said to number 6,666 men. The Theban legion was commanded by Mauritius, Candidus, Innocent, and Exuperius, all of whom are now venerated as saints. The legion was quartered in the east until the Emperor Maximian ordered them in 286 AD to march to Gaul, to assist him against the rebels of Burgundy. The senior officers of the Thebans conferred and ultimately refused these orders on behalf of the legion. Emperor Maximian's response was to decimate it twice. The decimations failed to coerce the rest of the legion to comply with the orders. This left Maximian with little option other than to have the rest of the legion put to death by his other legions to retain authority. At St. Maurice, Switzerland, then called Agninum, the legion refused to follow orders to perform pagan sacrifice according to the imperial cult, and even worse, to slay fellow Christians. 6,000 soldiers were reportedly killed, but we can assume that the entire 6,666 was slain. On disobeying the commands, the legion's martyred commanders protested, "We are your soldiers, O Emperor, but we are also servants of God." Imperial militia, the prevailing military code of discipline, was not entirely unchallenged. In 199 BC, Legis Porcia or Porcian Statute was introduced to give soldiers protection against executions and floggings. This was followed by Lex Valerian laws. And ultimately in the 2nd century AD Provocatio was introduced, which was a rudimentary version of modern-day human rights. In 361 AD, Emperor Julian, ironically an apostate, abolished decimation as a military punishment when he ascended to rule both the Eastern and Western Roman empires, thereby ending the practice across the entire Roman army once and for all. However, in reality, and the cold face of combat, the might of imperial militia still prevailed. Appeals were seen as insubordination, so the rights afforded under Provocatio were seldom if ever fully exercised. Enlisted soldiers on commencement of duties would swear an oath called the sacramentum, a submission or coercito of blind allegiance to their commanders, and Provocatio rights were suspended during campaigns. Now you know where the term coercion comes from. Further weighted against any sort of capital relief was the lex Davi publica or rights of the sword, which in effect was the law that in the heat of combat, doing whatever it takes to win trumped everything else. It stands testament to the practice that no decimation failed to achieve its aims. Those that survived learned the brutal reality that the military code was harsh but effective. Any demonstrations of fear or lack of will to win the fight would be mercilessly punished, and the only conduct acceptable in battle was to defeat the enemy or die trying.